The Rundown, Part 14. A Farlost story by John Miro.
Twilight fell upon the darkening road. I found myself again alone. Street lights went out by one, by two, by three. Now reveled in the shadows that had grown. Yes, I reveled in the darkness I had known.
A black uniform. Its absence of color sucked the light from the room. A gold circle on his chest, rays spoking all around. A sun medallion. System guard. In Locklaw. Without a ground invasion? How was that even possible? But Nick's mind was already filling in the blanks. Bennett Underwood's talks with Haven SG started today. Haven SG's independence was a lie. They were controlled by the Guard. Nick laughed weakly and wondered if he should be investing in a good tinfoil hat. Nope. This was real. This was happening. He stared at the stormtrooper in front of him, and his lips curled back in disgust. Yates cleared his throat behind him. Nicodemus Usher, meet your new partner. He cleared his throat again. Officer Donal Tyzan, System Guard. Captain? Nick growled in disbelief. Shut up, Usher. Yates growled right back, in a hard tone that surprised Nick. He turned sideways, looking a question at his boss while still keeping the enemy in his peripheral vision. The man was a few inches taller than Nick, but broader, well-muscled. He stood at casual attention, his face and eyes a blank as he stared back. He looked early 30s, but that meant nothing in Farlost, where Jerd piss or DNA-tailored cocktails let many choose their own physical age. For about the millionth time in his career as a cop, Nick wished people still looked their age. Only Tyzan's unruly blonde hair, a touch longer than uniform regulation, and a couple days' stubble across a strong chin revealed it wasn't business as usual for this fascist pig to be wandering the halls of Locklaw Pier Hospital. You want me to take him into Piertown? Nick tried again. He won't last a block once he leaves the Ringway station. Then get him some civvies. Just bring him back in one piece. Yates fixed him with a glare that could melt off a spaceship's re-entry tiling. He's only here because we lost his prisoner, Inspector Usher. Heat welled up in Nick's chest and he opened his mouth again, but was shut down a third time when his captain roared. Bird escaped after the city council promised the system guard we had him in custody. And why exactly did we have Roland Bird? Nick wondered silently, his anger sparking. Because a mercenary sold him to us instead of sending him directly to the guard. His intuition needed to follow that reasoning. But there was a system guard officer standing just feet away, and his captain was telling him to play nice with the man. We have the same problem. Tyzan's what they call a liaison officer. His specialty is playing nice with foreign governments. He came here for Bird. We lost Bird. We made a mess, and the council agreed to let him help us clean it up. Yates looked squarely at Tyzan. I don't want this piece of shit here any more than you do, and I sure as hell wouldn't have granted him full access to our investigation. Nick blinked, forgetting the chain of reasoning he'd been following. Full access? Sir, he could be taking back what he learns. Yates held up a hand. It is what it is, and whatever the hell it is was decided above my pay grade. I don't want a problem. I want Bird found, that's it. No, actually, I want Bird found and everybody wearing a sun medallion out of my city before I decide to shoot them myself. Understood, Inspector? Disbelief and the debt of respect owed to this man warred in Nick's head until he finally jerked his head up and down in an almost nod. Yates nodded back and sighed as the steel left his gaze, leaving tired and sad in its place. We lost one of ours, Inspector. Find his killer and bring him in. Captain! The new voice and its owner jerked to a stop in the doorway behind the guard officer. The young eyes of a uniformed patrol officer turned into saucers. What is it, Turner? Yates prompted the officer. The beat cop's eyes found the captain's, and the interrupted words tumbled out. There's alders and counselors downstairs, sir, half a dozen, maybe more, and reporters are setting up on the front steps of the hospital. Yates dug a palm into his left eye. What now? He asked. No one was stupid enough to try and answer. He brushed past Nick. Take me to the politicians, Turner. The officer turned to go, but halted when Yates stopped in front of the guard officer. You're a guest here, Tyzan. You'll follow our rules. I understand, Captain Yates, Tyzan said, a surprisingly quiet voice emanating from his large frame. My priority is Roland Byrd, but I will represent the System Guard as best I can while I'm here. Except maybe less killing and piracy, Nick fumed. Tyzan's hard eyes found his again. Yates shook his head. Whatever you two need to do to work it out and get to work, have it done before you leave this room. He flashed a different look back at Nick. Angry, frustrated. Those are your orders. He left the room. Nick stared. The poster child for baddies stared back at him. I didn't see this coming, Nick said numbly. Which part, Inspector? Tyzan asked. The part where your corrupt and inefficient police department let Byrd's accomplices know where to find him? The part where you let a mass murderer escape? Or is it this part? Tyzan gestured at himself. The part where I was called in to clean up your mess. That rage filled Nick again, just for a moment. Then he thought of Pesh, and grief and pain drowned his fury. Then that faded too, and the glorious buzz of whatever the Jerd had shot him full of returned. Nick took a steadying breath and smiled at his partner. The part where I'm supposed to do my job and keep you alive. He started for the door. Not going to be easy with you wearing that. I came for a prisoner, not field operations, Tyzan muttered, falling in beside Nick in the hall. The necessary motions of the hospital had picked up after the surprise appearance of a System Guard uniform in their midst, but the place was still eerily quiet, and all eyes were fixed on them as they made their way to the elevators. Silence as they waited for the elevator car. Silence as they entered, and silence as they descended. Finally, Inspector. Tyzan coughed and spoke, his voice soft. Concern showed through them. I'm sorry about your partner. Nick whipped around, his hands balled into fists. Not another fucking word. Tyzan turned to face him, his eyes again glittering. Somehow, neither man threw a punch. The silence continued until the elevator doors slid open onto chaos. The lobby was filled with reporters, all barking questions. Camera bots whizzed overhead. A blue and gray line of uniformed officers worked to push the reporters back out of the lobby onto the old stone steps outside. On the left, sure enough, Nick saw Captain Yates, and more than a dozen sentients behind a police cordon of their own. Some Nick recognized. Alders for boroughs across Piertown, a few from Metro, a few from farther out districts, and several counselors. Cree himself was floating behind the city police commissioner, whipping his tail angrily while Yates and the commissioner talked quietly, their backs to the recording devices of the media horde. He looked over his shoulder, considering the guard officer. A quarter of Lochlaw's government was here now. If the System Guard wanted to hurt Lochlaw, sewing a bomb into the liaison officer's belly would do a damned good job of it. He looked past Tyzan at another row of Lochlaw police, and behind this line of officers stood more suits. Nick recognized some of them from news coverage. The delegation from Haven SG. Expensive suits, dark green military outfits festooned with medals and epaulettes, and the scarred face of General Lehman Tarquis, Haven SG's military dictatorship version of a vice president. An old man, with scars on his face he'd never had removed, and intelligent eyes. Fittingly, 4 more black uniforms and sun medallions were gathered next to the general. Maybe Tarquis was intelligent. Maybe he meant well by his people. He was still a puppet for the guard. Nick ground his teeth. System Guard soldiers walking free in Lochlaw? It is what it is, he told himself. He didn't have to like it, but it was time to stop bitching and deal. Pesh deserved his best. He was fighting to shift gears from bitching to dealing, when his Copley intuition drew his focus back to the middle of the room, to Tyzan. The guard officer was ramrod straight, like a cadet failing inspection and getting a strip torn off for it. He was facing away from Nick at the system guard contingent, and he looked guilty? Surprised? Something. He tracked Tyzan's gaze through the pool of black uniforms to one in particular, one that bore no badges, medals, or other pollution. This black jacket bore plain brushed silver buttons, a high neck, and a belt crossing from his right shoulder across his chest and down to clip onto the belt around his waist, and there was something like a sun medallion on his left chest. Nick had never seen a guard medallion like that before. Different sun medallion insignias indicated the rank and service branch of their wearers. This one was similar to a high-ranking military branch medallion, with the rays of differing lengths all spoking out from a polished mirror center, but this one wasn't gold. It was black, with silver shooting through it. The man started across the room towards Tyzan. The 4 other guard soldiers started along with them. These were definitely soldiers, though they were unarmed. They moved like trained killers, watchful, alert, ready, and as unhappy to be there as Nick was to see them. The room was once again quiet as the lobby doors hissed closed. All eyes were on the system guard personnel, but no one gave orders. The ringleader for this circus wasn't present yet. He watched Tyzan as the man in unmarked black approached, now flanked 2 guards deep on either side. Tyzan stood at a deeply formal attention. This was someone Tyzan either respected or feared. "Liaison Officer Tyzan," the man called out warmly, a smile on his face. The smile flickered when Tyzan executed a crisp salute, then became gently chiding, as if he were humoring some childish affectation of Tyzan's. "Officer, there is no need for formalities." He indicated the bare chest of his dress uniform. "I am here in an advisory role only." He turned and bowed his head towards the Haven delegation. "At the request of our friends and Lochlaw's neighbors. A neutral third party," he offered with a chuckle, during these delicate negotiations. Tyzan remained at rigid attention despite the words. The man sighed good-naturedly and patted Tyzan's shoulder. "Always at your best, or so I've heard," he said. Tyzan nodded crisply, eyes remaining straight ahead, only just betraying his confusion. Nick guessed Tyzan knew the badge, not the man. "Thank you, sir," he replied in a soldier's booming voice. The man rolled his eyes and walked past, extending a hand to Nick. "You are Nicodemus Usher." Nick stared at the offered hand, pointedly did not raise his own, and looked back to the newcomer's face. His black hair was close-cropped. A short, perfectly maintained beard and mustache surrounded an amused smile. He pulled his hand back, shaking his head with silent mirth. "I'm being too familiar, of course. We are not yet friends. I hope I will be able to say different before I leave this city." Captain Yates and the commissioner were crossing the room. Nick kept silent on what the jack-booted prick could do with his friendship and where he could stick his hand. "Consul Gomersall," the commissioner called. "We're about ready to begin, but I feel obligated to mention again—" "Yes, Commissioner, you've already said," Consul Gomersall interrupted with equal parts boredom and scorn. "It's not safe for system guard scum to show their face in your city. Your citizens will surely tear me to pieces, and your officers can't be trusted to stop them, I know. Nevertheless, I have accepted your council's invitation, and I am quite sure that somehow I shall survive a few days in your charming city." The commissioner leaned back as if he'd been slapped. The cold silence of the lobby dropped toward absolute zero. The front doors opened again, and over the renewed roar of the reporters gathered outside came the kind, fatherly laughter known far and wide as the signature sound of Counselor Bennett Underwood. Nick knew then who had planned this press conference. He stared across the room at the bald head and manicured waving hands still playing to the crowd through the closing doors. The laughter fell away to a chuckle as Counselor Underwood turned and clapped his hands together, a brilliant smile on his perfectly composed face. He reached down, ghosting his hands once over the intricately knotted tie beneath his perfectly tailored black suit, and the smile grew even wider. Underwood instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Thank you for coming, citizens and honored guests," he said, meeting each eye to convey a moment of recognition and gratitude. Until he met Nick's eye. "Inspector Nicodemus Usher!" He looked overjoyed as he strode across the room. "Inspector, the city owes you another debt." He held his hands up, palms out to silence Nick before Nick even knew how to respond. "No, I'm sorry, but we do. Thorns, Inspector, they're going to start making movies about you if you keep up these heroics." Underwood spoke louder, but somehow conveyed he was confiding to everyone assembled. "I am only alive thanks to this man's quick action and selflessness, and now, today, well, who knows how much more damage could have been done if you hadn't stopped that ship, one of my own, from attacking the pier. Thank you, Inspector." "Thank you, sir, but—" Underwood lay his hands on both Nick's shoulders. "I know. You've asked me not to mention you in my speeches, and I've been good, haven't I? And I hope the reporters are still respecting my request to keep your face out of the news. Just let me know if they slip up. I'll see to them. But don't expect me not to sing your praises in private." Underwood gave him one more beaming smile, clapped him on the shoulders, and stepped back. "Let's talk again soon, Inspector. My door is always open to you, but right now I've got some very important people waiting." The counselor turned slowly, nodding to all those gathered, exchanging pleasantries, serious handshakes, and even a couple of bows. Nick was amazed to see most faces in the crowd light up as if Underwood had hugged each and every one, then called them pretty. Nick was still amazed how effortlessly Underwood inspired people, moved them to emotion with no visible effort. A consummate politician. Nick watched him like a hawk. Bennett nodded to the alders and councilors, gave a stiff mockery of a polite smile to Councillor Cree, and then turned to the Haven delegation. Nick watched a parade of handshakes and murmured pleasantries. Underwood apologized for canceling the formal greeting on the pier. Underwood was so sorry for this terrible turn of events. Underwood was committed to renewed trade and prosperity between their two cities. And then Bennett was face to face with Consul Gomersall, and that's where it got interesting for Nick. The two men smiled, nodded, and said nothing. Bennett clapped his hands together again. "Shall we begin?" In moments, a dozen assistants and civil servants appeared, insinuating themselves into the crowd and whispering into every dignitary's ear. Not blessed with a flunky of his own, Nick could only watch as the politicians lined up behind Bennett at the door. "Inspector?" Nicodemus turned his body square to face Consul Gomersall as he stopped on his way to the door. One should always greet a threat head-on. Obvious enjoyment played over the consul's face for just a moment before the man dialed it back to a mockery of respect. "Given the counselor's praises, I can only assume it's not you who is to blame for Roland Bird's escape. Perhaps you can undo your city's shame before it undermines the trust that our two cities—" He smiled a shark smile. "That is, your two cities have worked so hard to rebuild." Consul Gomersall let the words hang in the air like a foul smell, and he watched Nick closely, measuring his response. Nick had plenty of experience in hiding his emotions, though, and while he was certain this system guard mouthpiece knew exactly how he felt about him, Nick wouldn't let Gomersall see it. A servant appeared at the consul's side, clearing his throat and gesturing to the door where the dignitaries were gathering. The consul silenced him with a snap of his fingers before he could speak. "Your jacket. Take it off." Gomersall kept his brown eyes fixed on Nick as the functionary quickly stripped out of his black overcoat, folding it before holding it out. "I wish you good hunting, Inspector Usher." He took the man's jacket and dismissed him with a backhand wave. "Tyzan," he called, and the liaison officer marched over. "Take this," he said in words that sounded an awful lot like an order from someone wearing no rank, a guest of a foreign government technically here only to advise their friends in Haven SG. Official standing or no, command authority or no, Tyzan took the coat. "Let the cameras get a good look at you in uniform," Gomersall advised, "but you won't get any work done showing the sun here." "Yes, sir," Tyzan replied, taking the jacket and holding it at his side. The consul started to speak, stopped, and started again. "I knew Sala." Nick watched Tyzan's face reveal surprise and hurt before he hid behind a 1,000-yard stare again. "I wondered who approved my request to join the recovery." Tyzan nodded at the strange black sun medallion on the consul's chest. "Thank you, sir." Gomersall waved the words away. "Some feared you would put revenge above duty. You will not. The Guard has announced the time and place of Roland Bird's end, and no force in Farlost can change that." There was that System Guard arrogance on display, Nick thought. The words were spoken as if foretold by the universe, as certain a thing as the number of thorns in the sky. Nick saw a crack in the armor, a touch of raw pain on Tyzan's face, not being soothed by the consul's grandiose words. The consul had talked of revenge. Tyzan had lost someone important enough to turn his life on end to be here and deal with Bird himself. "Now we play our parts," the consul said, his voice again cheery and light. He leaned closer to Nick, whispering as if sharing a secret. "Our two people share a world, a history, and a common enemy. Farlost itself." His smile was arrogant, bordering on a sneer. He turned back to Tyzan. "Come out with me. Central Control is a joke here. Better to face their reporters here, or they will haunt you until they get a bite of your fame." He nodded at the jacket. "But after this, plain clothes only until you're out of this place." The discomfort on Tyzan's face was obvious to Nick. "Yes, sir." Gomersall caught Nick's glare. He pointed his finger and bent his thumb as if cocking an imaginary gun. "Good hunting, officer." The consul's lip curled into a bloodless grin, and he shot at Nick before heading toward the door and disappearing behind his escort of black uniformed bodies. Tyzan's face had been overwhelmed out of parade rest by the consul's words, and despite himself, Nick recognized a man racked by confusion and suffering. His deep well of pain called to Nick's own, and he instinctively gave a nod of encouragement, which was enough to turn the liaison officer's face back to neutral stone. Nick tried to shrug off the disrespect, wondering why he'd even momentarily expected anything else from the Guard. Tyzan turned and joined the line of suits and uniforms walking down the stairs. Thank you for coming," Underwood boomed down below, and a cheer rose from the crowd outside. Nick shook his head and turned away, heading for a side door onto the street. He'd circle around and watch the circus from behind the cameras. He finally had time to think as he bounded out the door and back to the front of the building. How was it that the most hated mass murderer in Farlost, long wanted by the SG, just happened to come into Locklaw custody? How was it that the same prisoner just happened to make a violent, bloody escape from police custody during the first trade visit from Haven SG in history? Nothing was that convenient. It all tied together in a neat narrative. His fingers traced the outline of the necklace hidden beneath his shirt as he jogged to the edge of the crowd gathered at the bottom of the ancient stone steps. There was information hidden inside that necklace. Information on the architect of this historic trade deal. The same man who had arranged for Roland Bird to pass through Locklaw's hands on his way back to the System Guard. Counselor Bennett Underwood. The speech was already underway. Bennett Underwood stood in a spotlight of bright light alongside General Tarquis. Nick flashed back to Gomersall and Underwood's wordless greeting and on the consul's cold smile. He wanted revenge for Pesha's death. He wanted every System Guard uniform to take a long walk off the pier. Those were hatreds he would never shake. But even more than the hate, Nick Usher felt a growing fear, a fear in his very bones. He didn't know what, but something terrible was about to happen in his city. You have been listening to The Rundown, a Farlost story, written by John Miro. Learn more at servingworlds.com. Opening music, Everything Is Not What It Appears, kindly provided by Nate Maingard at natemaingard.com. Closing music, Full On by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. If you like what you hear, you can become a patron and support more stories at patreon.com/servingworlds. Thanks for listening. See you next week.